Labguy here. This is PhiloCam project episode 8, part 3 of the new video format and sync generator portion of the project. A lot of news to report today. The first thing is, let's take a look at the finalized form of the video format. What you'll see in the upper left corner of the format frame is the image frame. There are two frames conceptually here. There is the image frame and then there's the sync frame. The sync frame is 1,000 clock cycles wide. Each clock cycle is 250 nanoseconds, being generated by the 4 megahertz master clock, M clock. The picture frame, the image frame, is 65,536 bytes. That's 256 by 256. Since our scan line is 1,000 clocks wide, if I was to clock the image frame out at the same clock speed, it would only be 25% of the width of the time of a scan line. Alright, so what I've done is I've moved the image memory chip from being run in parallel with the sync memory chip and put the video memory chip on its own address counter. In fact, it's a 16-bit counter which will count to 65,536. It operates in bursts. It runs for the first 768 clocks of each 1,000 clock scan line, so that each pixel clock of the frame memory, of the video memory, will occur every 3 M clocks, so that it is spread out 3 times wider. It makes up approximately 3/4 of the scan line time. This video format has a stupid wide horizontal blanking interval. It's almost 25% of the scan line. Nobody cares. It'll be fine. So we'll look at the schematic of that in a moment. So this is the format of the frames. There are 2 frames. Let me reiterate. The image frame, which comes from 1 memory chip, and the sync frame originating in the master sync generator. The sync frame runs 1,000 clock cycles per line. This divides the 4 megahertz to 4 kilohertz, which is our horizontal scanning frequency. There are 267 lines in a complete frame. That is a complete sync frame. In the image frame, there are 256 lines. This leaves 11 additional lines, which are the vertical blanking interval, which you see at the bottom of my frame diagram. In that interval, below the picture, the image frame, is the vertical sync pulse, and that's where it would live. So conceptually, one final time, there is an image frame and a sync frame, and they meet at the upper left corner where the address for both frames is 0, 0. So looking at the entire schematic of the sync generator and frame memory, you will see that structurally the upper circuit, the upper half circuit, is the sync state machine, the sync frame generator. The lower half of the schematic is the video frame generator. The sync frame generator has a 19-bit address counter, a memory chip, and a latch. The lower portion, the image memory, has a 16-bit address counter, a memory chip, a latch, and a digital to analog converter. Looking at the sync memory, taking a closer look at it now, it starts on the left with the master clock running at 4 megahertz, driving the 3 8-bit counters, which give me my 19 address lines to drive the sync pulse flash memory. Inside the sync pulse flash memory, at address 266,999, that's 267,000 clock pulses from the master clock oscillator, is a reset pulse which wraps back around to reset the 19-bit counter. This closes our loop at 15 cycles per second. And then the rest of the pulses are simply canned within the memory. And like I said before, you can think of it as the little drum in a music box, music engine, or you can think of it as a perforated piano roll on a piano that has only 8 keys. Either way, it's a sequencer, and it will output the appropriate pulses. Now we're looking at the frame memory, the image memory, I should say, the image memory. It has 2 8-bit counters generating a 16-bit address to drive the flash memory chip, which drives the latch, which drives the D to A converter. There are a couple of features that I need to point out. These memory counters run in a burst. They count 256 times, starting at the start of each line. That's each sync line, which is 1,000 clock cycles long. The address counter is incremented on every third master clock pulse, which makes it take 756 clocks, 3 times 256, to clock its pixels out. This pixel clock originates in the sync state machine, and it's just canned pulses in one of the bit positions, and they come in bursts of 256 at a time, and then during the blanking period of time there are no clock pulses. These counters and the 19-bit counter are reset by the master reset pulse of the state machine. So once every frame, everybody gets reset back to 0, 0, or the upper left corner of the frame diagram I showed you a little while ago. Another feature of this circuit, if you look closely at the right side of the flash memory, there is a signal called VDOE0. This is the output enable of the flash memory. During active video, that is turned on, and the pixel data from the memory comes out and is latched into the 74HC574 latch as a normal progression of pixels. During blanking, the output of the flash memory is turned off. It becomes tri-state. It's just like you pulled the chip out of the socket. Notice the resistor pack, the yellow resistor pack below the latch. It is 8 pull-down resistors. So when the memory chip goes into high impedance state, those 8 resistors pull the inputs of the latch down to 0. And the latch then starts latching zeros for the entire blanking period. The output of the latch drives the digital to analog converter, which now goes to 0 volts because it's being fed digital zeros. During active video, the D to A converter is fed a number from 0 to 255, and I will set the video level set control so that when 255 is coming out of the memory, the output of the op-amp will be 700 millivolts, 0.7 volts. That's a standard video signal, a non-composite, just the analog video image information goes from 0 volts to 0.7 volts. And that's how that circuit will work. Looking at the clock pulse system, the sync system, we're looking at the two diagrams here. The one on the left is line timing. Looking at the important moments in the line timing. A to B is active video. That's made up of 756 M clocks, 256 nanosecond cycles, which are the 256 pixels of the picture stretched out by 3. Then from point B to point A, that is the horizontal blanking interval. That's the time when no video is generated. The time from point C to D is a horizontal sync pulse. I show the horizontal sync and the horizontal blanking here superimposed in my diagram as a composite of the two so that you can see their relationship. Blanking starts and goes for 58 clock cycles, and then sync starts and it goes for 58 clock cycles, and then the back porch following sync lasts for 116 cycles. So that makes up the sync time. My diagram is not to scale per se, and so that from point B to point A would be approximately 25% of the cycle. It's a very wide blanking interval. Again, who cares? We will adjust the scanning size in the camera tube later so that the point from A to B, the active scan line, will scan across the tube at that point. On the right-hand diagram, that's frame timing, and it's measured in lines, and a line is 1000 M clock cycles. So going from point A all the way around to point A again is one frame. That's 265 lines, or 266,000 M clocks. The active video is the points between A and B. During that time, that is the vertical part of the video frame, the active video. From B to A is the vertical blanking interval, and it is 11 lines wide, 11,000 clock cycles. From C to D is the vertical sync pulse. That is 3 lines wide, or 3,000 master clock cycles wide. Now, there is probably going to be a little bit of corrections where I shift that sync pulse over so that when it falls, instead of falling at the start of a line, at the start of blanking, I will make it fall at the start of the horizontal sync so that they are in time together. I don't show the composite sync here. That means the horizontal sync pulses and the vertical sync pulse together, because at the moment I don't have vertical sync phased correctly with horizontal sync. Now let's look at the 8 test images I have prepared to put into the frame memory. These are the actual images that I will put into the frame memory. Starting in the upper left, going left to right, is the PhiloCam logo frame, which will come on when the camera's turned on. It will switch to this frame for 3 seconds at power on, and then it will go back to whatever the switches are set for. There will be a selector switch, by the way, that controls the 3 upper bits, which can count to 8 states, the 3 upper bits of the video memory chip, the image memory chip. And that's how we select which of the 8 64K locations in that chip will be read out at one time. The second picture to the right is Philo T. Farnsworth, who the project is named after. The PhiloCam is based on his image dissector tube, and it just seemed like such a great name. So of course, Philo Farnsworth is the second image in the memory. The third image is a chopped down version of the Indian head test pattern. The fourth image is historically significant. This is a picture of Laurel and Hardy from the film Them Thar Hills. If you haven't seen it, look it up and watch it. It is hysterically fun. They are driving in a Model T towing a small camping trailer. This was the first video frame that I got with my frame grabber in 1986 that I was able to save to a disc. Now, long before I could save to disk, I was able to bring video into the memory and see it, and I could freeze frame, but that was it. Once you turned it off, it was gone. This image was the first image that I successfully saved to a computer disk. This image was stored on an 8-inch floppy disk, and those disks, you would laugh if you saw one today. I don't have one to show you. Could hold 18 64K pictures. So in those days, since I only had like 10 discs, I was cheap. I had to be very selective of which pictures I saved. But the very first picture I saved to disk has survived this entire time. And it is appropriate to put it into the frame memory here. Now back on the lower left is a picture of some fool I found, and I think that's the Labguy, if I'm not mistaken. And next to him, the next picture over, is just a whimsical picture of a chicken. I saw that in my humor directory and I thought, why not? Then I have the radiation trefoil, which was a computer generated graphic, and it is absolutely perfectly round. And like the test pattern above it, that is used to set the scan size of the video monitor, which appropriately will be named the PhiloMon. And then the final picture is the picture of the lithophane from my previous project, the Chief. And it just has to be in here too. So those are the 8 images that you will see coming out of this board when it is finished here very soon. Progress is going very rapidly. This is a picture of my computer desktop. This is what it typically looks like when I'm working on these memory chips now. The big blue thing is the Quick Basic 64. As you see, code has been written. In the lower right, you see the programmer software for my Mini Pro TL866 device programmer. My calculator is there because I do a lot of arithmetic. I don't like to say math because I am no mathematician. I simply do arithmetic. And peeking out behind is the schematic editor. So this is typical of my desktop when I'm working on the software side of the project. And here's a picture of the actual device programmer that I use to program the memory chips. That's the Mini Pro TL866. Now what I discovered with the previous memory chips the last time I made the video was that the 4 chips that I originally purchased were either counterfeits or defective, but they didn't work. The programmer couldn't even recognize them at all. I ordered new chips, they've arrived, they work. Well, by golly, wouldn't you know it? The state machine is running. There's still improvements to make in the timing patterns, but it is now up running with a closed loop. The reset pulse for the 19-bit counter is programmed, and is making the thing run. It's producing horizontal sync pulses. We'll look at that in just a moment. And so that's the next thing we're going to do. Since the last video, I've reworked the board a little. This memory used to be over here, and this latch used to be over here. I've moved them so that I could put in the two new binary counters that drive the image memory chip. That circuit is not wired yet. This is the upper circuit you saw on the schematic here with the master clock oscillator, the three 8-bit counters, the sync memory chip, and the sync pulse latch. This section now operates. So it's able to produce a vertical sync pulse and a horizontal sync pulse at this time. I'm still working on the code to program the remaining bits. Composite blanking is also complete. Composite sync is a little more complex, and as I mentioned, the vertical sync pulse is in the wrong phase, but it can be trimmed to anywhere I want it with a resolution of 256 nanoseconds. This is incredibly accurate pulse positioning. It's just a matter of changing some parameters in the program and rerunning it. So this is the board so far. The D to A converter chip will go here, and the op-amp chip will go here for producing the video. I believe I'm going to put a 5-volt regulator in that corner because the board will require plus and minus 12 volts for the op-amp. So this is pretty much 88% of the hardware that will be on here already. You can see I removed the wiring, of course, that went over to these other chips. There's like having a tattoo removed, there's a bit of a leftover image of the original position of those. So let's hook up the power to it and look at the pulses on the scope. You'll note that I'm not running with my LED bench light turned on. That, I believe, is what causes that dithering in the video. So we're not going to run with that on today. So there we go. This is the setup for looking at it with the scope. We'll only look at it with one channel. Now let me move you over so you can see the oscilloscope screen. There's the horizontal sync, and on the bottom trace will be the horizontal blanking, which you notice is wider than the sync. It starts a little bit after the sync. I'll try to reposition this a little so we can see the difference. I've overlapped the pulses a little bit. The sync pulse is the upper trace, which is narrower than the blanking. During the period that the blanking pulse is high is the period of time when the picture will be read out of the image memory. The upper trace, the sync pulse, is what tells the horizontal scan in the camera to start another line. Okay, we're now looking at the vertical sync pulse. This is occurring at 1/15th of a second rate. From the first pulse to the second pulse is 667 milliseconds, or 1/15th of a second. And there we're looking at the pulse widened out. Now we compare it with composite blanking, and you can see the vertical blanking period, which is 11 lines wide. The vertical sync is on the upper trace, and the composite blanking is on the lower trace. And of course it's flashing vigorously because we're only getting updated 15 times a second, and we're looking at a very small portion of it, which has a short duty cycle, so it's going to flicker. This video format is going to be one epilepsy-inducing little monster. So there are pulses that are coming out of my state machine now. Here's the vertical sync versus the horizontal sync, and then composite blanking. As you can see, the sync generator is operating. So that summarizes the assembly of the board. If you like this video, click that thumbs up button. I really appreciate it. And tell your friends. I think this is going to be a very exciting project. And until next time, Labguy out.